Welcome back, and thank you to this panel for being here this morning, who all have very busy schedules. Judge Joan Synenberg is here at the end. Thank you for coming. Brian Hoffman from the Public Defender's Office, correct? Patti London, who is so dear because she has taken classes here for many, many years. And after I lost my daughter, Patti and I developed quite a dialogue ongoing. And so it's really an honor that I have her finally here speaking for me. And Justin Herdman, who is the U.S. Attorney now and for the Cuyahoga County. And I'm just thrilled that he could be here. I was asked several years ago to be on the committee, the Opiate Task Force, and I just have really enjoyed working with you and with the task force. And they have been great friends to me. In fact, they collected my daughter's phones after she passed away, and I had trouble getting the phones back, and I wanted the photos. And I finally contacted someone at the U.S. Attorney's Office who literally, on their own, went, found the phones, got the photos, loaded them onto a CD for me, and personally delivered them to me. So the U.S. Attorney's Office has been really kind in working with me, and I really owe them a great thanks. So with that, thank you everyone for being here, and I'll let you get started.
All right.
Who's going first?
Judge, I'll defer to the judge.
All right.
Oh, okay, good morning.
Yes.
I take orders, I don't just give them. Good morning, it's really nice to be here. Cheryl, thank you for putting this together, and it's also a pleasure to sit with my co-panelists here on this important community epidemic that we're dealing with right now. And I'm grateful that we are gathering today, so many of us, so many friendly faces and familiar faces, as we gather here in Mission. And for many people in our community, it's not like that right now. And this overdose epidemic is hitting us hard and fast. And every single day in our community, we are losing people, of course, to heroin, cocaine. But what's very dangerous out there right now are those analogs, because no matter who you are, you're not immune to buying a product that isn't what you think it's supposed to be. And a lot of people who are out there thinking that they're using something that's some social recreational party drug or something wind up in the medical examiner's office because it's tainted with something else. So this is a bit of a retrospective, I understand, this part of the discussion today on the last 5 years, which coincides with the commencement of Recovery Court, which commenced 5 years ago. We are wrapping up year 5 right now. And fortunately, we do see that there are some solutions in our community, like treatment courts. And everyone on this panel is familiar with them. I've known Patti the longest of everyone on this panel because we've both been lawyers for a little while, but I was I wasn't a public defender. I felt like one. For 16 years, I did criminal defense work. Thank you, Patti. That's so sweet of you. So our professional paths have crossed for many, many years. And as you heard, Brian Hoffman's in the public defender's office, and he's part of our team. So 5 years ago, we were awarded a grant to start the first Supreme Court certified dual diagnosis specialized docket in the state of Ohio for people diagnosed both with substance use disorder and with trauma. Presently, the grant calls for the dual diagnosis to be specifically for sexual trauma. And to give you an idea of how often that happens, our enrollment rate is 130%. And what we've learned is that treatment courts do work. To get into a treatment-oriented docket, you need to be charged with a crime, first of all. Sometimes we actually get calls from people that say, my son's in trouble, can you take him on your docket? I said, well, is he charged with anything? They said, no. I can't do anything about that. The good news, bad news is that people who do get arrested, fortunately, it's a fortunate intersection where an angel may come in the form of a DEA agent or a police officer. And our clients who are addicted, and by the way, it's not a moral failure, it's not a spiritual failure. Addiction is a disease, and people don't choose it any more than they would having cancer. But there's a stigma attached to it, and I hope that we can all work on destigmatizing this disease so people can feel that getting treatment is the right path to take. But by the time we see someone, it's no matter the background or the path that they have been on, it's very similar circumstances. And I'm telling you, this applies to everybody. No one is immune. from homelessness. No one is immune from feeling utter shame from their lifestyle and from having disappointed so many people that care about them and have supported them. It's very, very difficult. Our clients are lonely, they feel isolated, and most of the people that we serve on our docket are parents, and most of them have lost their kids. So we see an 86% rate of unplanned pregnancies with opioid-addicted women, and I'm telling you right now, it is a distressing thing to see. We can tell you, because we are together. Brian and I are on this docket. We meet weekly, purportedly. We really meet about 3 times a week. But it's something that was substantial enough on our learning curve that we did get caring attorneys in our community to come in once a month on this pro bono collaborative to help our clients with those non-criminal needs, because you're not constitutionally entitled to a lawyer for something as important as losing your child or your home. So we're trying to do something about that too. But we are treatment-oriented, clinically driven, and what we've learned is that clinically driven care with the assistance of medication-assisted treatment does work. I want to thank Metro Hospital because they are embedded in our jail. Anyone in Cuyahoga County Jail, and right now there's 1,800 people, and that number is going down. That's a good number, better than it was, I should say. And by the way, Cuyahoga County Jail also is the largest de facto mental health hospital in Cuyahoga County because of the fact that we have so many people that are in need, don't know where to go, wind up in jail, and we can get them some help. And our clinical assessments of each of our clients drive their care. But it's 2.5 years of supervision, close work with the judge, close work with the team, swift measured sanctions for noncompliance, and a lot of positive feedback, frequent meeting. I will tell you, just as an aside, that having been in the jail for all of those for many, many years as a criminal defense attorney and previously working in the jail as a social worker, and recently having conducted a listening tour in part with the U.S. Attorney's Office, Justin Herdman's office, on a task force called STANCE for about 18 months going in and out of the jail. You know, it's like an invisible population, but those people are there right now as we speak, and that is our mission. Our mission is, as lawyers, is to help people, and there's so many people in need, and it's really families are touched. If someone's suffering from addiction, it's not just them, it's everybody. And you go to jail and you take a look at who's there, and it's disproportionately black, it's disproportionately poor, and there's something that all of us need to do to respond to it. And addiction and loneliness and poverty is so much a part of everyday life. So we live in this community together. And, you know, I always go back to this, the Holly song, He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother. Their welfare is our concern. And what we do matters. And how we regard people if they have the disease of addiction or if they're getting out of jail matters as well. I will tell you, this can start innocently enough. We've all heard about the link to prescription painkillers with opioid addiction, but also, as we see on our docket all the time, and Patti could tell you about this over her years in the public defender's office, decades, that we see people who fall prey to very clever predators out there, women, and these predators can spot them a mile away. They get them addicted very quickly to drugs, and they may hold them captive, they traffic them, and this goes on until it could be a bust in a hotel room. And picture that. You can have someone who's an innocent victim of some predator who's in a room with guns and drugs and winds up facing a whole bunch of time in prison because the police don't know who the real bad guys are, and everybody gets swept up. We see cases like that. I mean, this happens, and this happens here. And again, I tell you that there's no one who is immune from this disease. We've treated people who are teenagers, and we've treated people who are seniors. It can happen a variety of ways. It can be a sports injury, but we know that we cannot stigmatize people, and that the people on our docket, we don't call them defendants just for what it's worth. We do refer to them as clients. But recovery does work, and what's wonderful is seeing people get their kids back, seeing them regain self-respect. I want to mention, since we're talking a little bit about where we go from here, that we're very grateful for what the county has done recently to help us with what about the people who survive an overdose and don't get arrested. Those are the people I really worry about. So because Metro works so closely with us and sends an ER doc or a resident to each one of our court systems, they also welcomed me to spend a day in their ER. And overdoses are very, very common. They come in and out of the Metro ER, and these very busy doctors are taking care of these people and then moving on to the next. But thank you to Cuyahoga County. I know Matt Carroll's here today. I also saw Amy Budish, but I want to thank them for the $3 million that was sent to Metro specifically for the Thrive program, where not a busy ER doc, but a peer, a recovery coach can go and meet with that person who was just revived, whose life was saved, and try to steer them onto a path of recovery and holistic healing. So I want to thank them for that as well. We believe we're a purported abstinence program, but we do accept and not reject harm reduction models such as needle exchanges or fentanyl test strips. That's an on-the-site kit. It costs $1, but the county, thank you again to the county, is giving them away because someone can test their product and they may think that they have cocaine and that it's innocent and it's the same person they've bought from over and over. And it's okay, I've done this before. It's okay. Test their product and find out that it contains fentanyl. Now, we don't know that what people do, but we do know that in 25% of those people who test, they will change their behavior. We hope it's to not use. It may be to use less, but it does make a difference and it does save lives. We follow best practices, so I encourage my team, which is made up of clinicians, public defender, prosecutor. We follow best practices. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. If we don't know what to do, we consult with the experts because we want to do what years and years of evidence-based practice shows us works. That's what we follow. Narcan, the ultimate harm reduction model, Project Dawn, Metro. This is the reversal drug. And it works, but sometimes people have to be repeatedly revived because depending on the amount of drugs that they've ingested. I mentioned medication-assisted treatment earlier. That means that people who are suffering from the disease of addiction may be able to avail themselves of medications that are opiate inhibitors that reduce the high, reduce cravings, or eliminate the high, reduce cravings, and help people spend more focus on an actual recovery program. I want to thank you for including me today. I also want to mention that, 211 is something we didn't know much about, and that's a number like 911 or 411, but it's about information and getting linked to services. Not long ago, I got a call from someone who said, oh, my friend's kid is in a crisis, and I thought, well, where's my team? I don't know what to do without asking my trusty team. But 211 is a solution. And they have 60 people that work 24/7, and they're all trained, but many of them are social workers as well. Moving forward, we are going to continue to strive to reflect what our community needs. And I thank you again. It's wonderful to be here on a Sunday morning. There's a lot of places everyone could be, but you care enough to be here. And by the way, I apologize. I thought our panel discussion was 11:15. I was just out chit-chatting in the hallway. My apologies, my sincere apologies to you. But thank you as we gather today in Mission with so many people who truly care. It's inspiring. We're in this together. It's a community problem. There is a community solution. And thank you so much, Cheryl, for putting this together, and to my fellow panelists as well.
Thanks, Judge.
Thanks, Brian.
I'm Brian Hoffman. I'm an attorney with the Public Defender's Office in Cuyahoga County, but I'm more used to introducing myself as, hi, I'm Brian. I'm an alcoholic. I've been in recovery for a little over 5 years now. My sobriety date is March 24th of 2014. That is a big reason of why I wanted to be more involved in drug courts and recovery courts. It's a way for me to try to relate to my clients, to try to understand that struggle and to try to put those struggles into words and make Judge Synenberg's life very difficult. So quick background. They say it's a disease of emotions, thinking, things like that. I never really, a lot of people tell you my childhood was fine. I don't really have anything to blame my alcoholism on. And for a while, I kind of looked for that. I kind of looked for the solution. Where did I go wrong? Where did I mess up? Can I go back, get a do-over, do it a little differently? Things like that. But what they start talking about in the meetings, and I could relate to, is one of the sayings is, Once a cucumber becomes a pickle, it can never go back to being a cucumber again. And I'm pickled. And so it doesn't really matter how I got there or exactly why or when. There's funny things that we'll hear about, like, the rules for drinking to not become an alcoholic. You don't do these things. You don't drink at work. You don't drink it alone. And then the third one's always debatable. It always changes. But don't black out is another one that I heard. And so I started drinking about when I was 16. I didn't drink very heavily back then. I was too afraid. There were too many responsibilities and things. And then when I got to college, there's like no responsibilities, and I went off the deep end. But, sure, I was blacking out, but I wasn't drinking alone, and I wasn't drinking at work or at class, or, I made it to all my classes. I was getting good grades. It was fine. But the progression takes over. The desire, the rationality, the need, the craving for more sets in. And so soon after that, then it became, well, all right, so I'm blacking out sometimes, and I'm drinking alone, but I'm not drinking at work. And, so I'm not as bad as so-and-so. And when I came to the rooms, one guy told me right away, he said, look, relate, don't compare. You'll compare yourself right out of here. Because there's always going to be someone who is worse off, who has a worse story, who is not as bad as you. It's relate to the feeling. And that really took hold. Because really when it came down to it, my use was irrational. All right. But everything about drug use and alcohol abuse, it's irrational. We actually, on mental health examinations now, it's right on the same portion with other types of psychosis, depression, anxiety, alcohol use disorder, severe. Opiate use disorder, severe. And I think that kind of shows that it's kind of lumped in there because it causes people to do irrational things. So for people that maybe aren't in the same position or don't understand it, it's hard to conceptualize. If you told me, hey, Brian, you're allergic to strawberries. You can't eat strawberries. Okay, fine. I won't eat strawberries. I'll check if there's a smoothie that I'm having. I'll make sure there's no strawberries in it or something like that. Sure, no problem. But when it came to alcohol, I couldn't stop. Despite the warning signs, despite the behavioral signs, I couldn't stop. It didn't make sense, all right? And I think that's a lot of where our clients and where the people who are affected by this disease fall into. You can't stop. I wanted to stop. 6 a.m. I was swearing off drinking. I'm not drinking today. Oh my gosh, I feel terrible. I'm choking on my toothbrush as I'm brushing my teeth. 6 p.m., I couldn't stop thinking about going to the liquor store. It was like my car was on autopilot there. It's really hard to break that cycle. Even after getting sober, going to the grocery store was a big task. There's just bottles of wine, there's, the low-level booze, like everything was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? You're grinding through it. Through the first at least 6 months of sobriety, I used to have this idea that like, oh, maybe just like 1 week a year I can have as like my drinking vacation, right? My time away from it. And I held on to that. And it wasn't until later on, and eventually that went away. But it was a lot of like, okay, I had to start doing the stuff at first. And that's some of what I get into. Medical assisted treatment is one of those hot topics. And I think that's kind of that process, is to get away from it long enough so you can start thinking again, start being rational again. But for the time, it was so irrational. I used anything I could to protect the use. Lying, deceiving, manipulating, bending the rules of time and space and money, and like it just, without me knowing or understanding it, it became the top priority. All right. And I would never have said that. I never wanted it. It just, everything became okay if it was just give me a little bit of time to use. All right. So one of the things that we're working on is to try to destigmatize the label. All right. It is really, really hard to walk in the rooms of an AA meeting and say that you're an alcoholic. Really hard. It's a blessing now today. Really hard when I first did it. It's one of those things that we got to give people more credit for, because people want to avoid that label. We don't want to have problems. We don't have to want to work on things. We don't want those extra things. And so it was funny. I was looking up. There's always these things online in different articles. This one's from Esquire.com, and the guy writes in, Dave, I have been drinking entirely too much lately. Every night for the last 2 weeks, I've had 3 to 5 drinks over the course of a few hours, and the result is I feel terrible. I don't black out. I don't try to hide my drinking, and I don't drink alone. I don't think I fit the definition of an alcoholic, but if I'm being honest with myself, I know my behavior isn't healthy. short of going to any AA meeting. Do you have any ideas what I should do about it? Thanks, Brad in Boston, right? And so this guy in Esquire magazine writes a response to it based on logic and reason and rational thinking. And it's like, oh, okay, well, take the month of February off. And then, after that, really try to control your drinking. You're going to have that first drink and, the second drink needs to be a water and just slowly immerse yourself back in. It's like, this guy's clueless. He doesn't have a clue what it's like in terms of when I take that first drink, the craving comes on. I want more. Typically, people who don't have a problem don't have to sit there and try to control their drinking. They don't have to plan out which days. I mean, I used to think, oh, if I'll take this day off, I'll only drink on, Tuesdays and Thursdays and, one night on the weekends or whatever it might be. And I could never even keep to my own schedule. Most people that are not an alcoholic don't have to do that. So it's funny, like just reading this, and the guy at the end is, well, above all, forgive yourself. Alcohol sometimes brings guilt and shame along with it, and those are terrible house guests. Kick them out. You're learning how to be a person, and that's hard work. Good luck. Thank you, Esquire. It just shows some of the lack of knowledge that there is this belief in the community that it's just as easy as saying, I'm done. I don't want to have that drink. I'm not going to do it. It's not. I couldn't stop. Most people I talked to couldn't stop. There had to be that intervening factor, whether it's a nudge from the judge or whether it's, some people will say my wife was my DUI, or I was just at a place where everything was falling apart. I'm losing my job, losing my car. And we kind of define it by the consequences, but really it's this internal motivation that eventually it's like there is just this tunnel that is dark and there's no light at it anymore and I don't know what else to do. And that's when I walked into the rooms for myself. So the epidemic and where we are today, some of the things that I see now are 13 seems to be the magic number for whatever reason. A lot of our clients and a lot of basically anyone who comes in the court system now, I'll see 13 as the number of when they started using drugs. 13 years old, drugs or alcohol. And typically by 16, it's like you're talking the harder drugs. You're talking Percocets, you're talking cocaine, a lot of those things. So it seemed, I don't know, maybe that's not how it was before. But to me, that was alarming. I'm like, wow, this is really young to start using. And now the drugs, they're so much stronger. They're more addictive. I mean, people say even, okay, the heroin back in the 70s isn't the heroin now. Everything is stronger. Everything is amped up to a new level. For me, it's hard to even fathom. I thought stopping alcohol was grueling and difficult for me. I can't imagine something more addictive. And they say the opiates and cocaine and other drugs are even harder to quit. So now a typical case will come through my office and cocaine is cut with heroin so frequently now. Heroin is with fentanyl almost all the time now. And sometimes it's not just heroin and fentanyl, it's all these crazy derivatives of heroin. I'm not going to try to pronounce, or heroin and fentanyl and all the derivatives of fentanyl, acetfentanyl and carfentanil and all these just crazy synthetic forms of it. I may have one case with someone who's thinking they've just got one dose of heroin and it's cut with all this other stuff. It's a death dose, basically. And it is becoming the norm rather than the exception. The other scary thing is meth. There's a rise in meth because meth is safer. Meth is safe, right? That's kind of the thinking that's out there right now. And so we're seeing a lot more methamphetamine use. One of the things I think is great news is the rise of MAT. It's debatable. Everyone has different opinions on it. Previously, it seemed like it was methadone, and then now there's Suboxone. And right now, I think the most popular one that we recommend is Vivitrol. I think it's way better. But those are, again, personal opinions. I don't try to judge on that. And now we're hearing about this new one called Subutex or something like that. Sorry, I don't know but it's like a Suboxone-based injection that self-weans. It sounds like it's great. But I think those things are good because it gets you through those first, that crazy 6 months that I was talking about. It gets you through. Now, some people will say maybe it's a crutch. It's hard to say. But I know that for me, knowing the strength of it and seeing my clients, no one's really able to quit on their own. Having that MAT and at least getting them so they're not going right back out. I share a case of my friend John that I know from church. So I gave a lead at my church one time, and some people would contact me. Well, his story was he overdosed once. The first time he overdosed, scared him to death. Oh my gosh, went to the hospital, got back out. He went and used again. The same stuff that just made him overdose. And the thought process, well, I'm just not going to use as much. And he overdosed again, twice in one day, like not too far apart. And it just shows like that there is that immediate need to like get someone detoxed and get someone on assisted treatment. I hear that the Vivitrol is great because it reduces your cravings, it blocks out bad dreams. It doesn't prevent every type of drug use, but it really kind of helps that person get stable for a little while. That's why we're a proponent of it. The other good thing is I've seen in the AA rooms, drug use is more acceptable to speak about now. There was this like thing a while ago about like, well, there's NA for you know, the harder drugs and the drug addicts. And it's like, whoa, no, alcohol is a drug. Come on, people. It's addiction. We're here. And it's much more accepting now. So the AA meetings now seem to basically allow both things very, very connectedly, and as it should. It's the same type of thing. In terms of going forward, I think a new treatment center would be great as a jail alternative, having a place that maybe is locked down, but also gets people detoxed and has MAT available right there. You know, rather than just sending people, lumping them into the county jail with all the terrible conditions and all the problems that are in the county jail, and then they get kind of in the system and everything gets backed up. There's times when before we get someone in our drug court, it's like 60 days goes by sometimes. And it's just not the person that really needs jail. They need to be in treatment rather than jail. So Judge and I have talked about this a lot, is how great it would be to have like a separate holding facility that either offers lockdown treatment if someone can't make bond or needs to actually stay put, because a lot of times people will just leave out of facilities. Mm-hmm. Have a residential component, have a PHP if needed, or an IOP, just something on site that the county runs and can fund, and we have it right there. It's secure, and we can keep a better eye on people, but we're not subjecting them to the county jail and the additional traumas that may be there. Having that MAT immediately, I think, is great. Detox on site would be great if there was, a lot of times my clients will talk about detoxing in the jail and how horrible it is, and we don't really have a lot of medication available for people. They're really suffering in there. And then to be able to assess them on arrival, what are their treatment needs? A lot of times we're waiting like 30 days for an assessment for someone on a treatment. I mean, if you're caught with heroin and you recently overdosed, do we really need to tell you that the person needs to go to treatment? I mean, it's like, it's a no-brainer. Like, we want to be able to skirt people there much sooner than what's required under these assessments. I think someone could do that quick evaluation. And that would be my biggest thing going forward as to what our community needs. Thanks.
Good job, Brian.
Thanks. Sorry, I was talking fast.
Sorry. Well, first of all, I really respect your sobriety, given that the criminal defense bar and the public defender's office in particular are hotbeds for alcohol use and some drugs. But we try really hard every day, and there's a lot of emotional impact of doing our job. So there's a so-called justification for letting loose and partying hard too, but it is not healthy. It's not good for the younger people in the office to think that this is an okay way to deal with their emotional needs. So hopefully we'll both set a better example. I try and make everybody do yoga, meditate. So I work in a little bit different aspect. I have also a specialized docket, but it's with the mental health court. And it's a little bit different, but there's an enormous overlap. So plenty of the people that I come into contact with through my job also have addiction issues. And I think the mental health component lends itself to self-medicating. I see a lot of people who have schizophrenia, for example, they like PCP. Unlike the way PCP might work on us, it makes their voices stop. We would probably start hearing voices, but it actually has an opposite effect from what I've been told. And why do people self-medicate? Well, I think that the drug courts are actually there in the same respect as the mental health courts, to give people these other options. You don't have to self-medicate. You don't have to stop using by yourself. There is help available. There are 5 mental health court judges on the bench. Are there like 34, 40,
Yes,
34
there's
judges?
34.
So out of all those judges, 5 of them, they also hear civil cases and other criminal cases, but I would venture that the mental health court docket takes up a huge proportion of their time. So I am totally respectful of the dedication that those judges have on the specialized dockets. Actually having a specialized practice in the public defender's office takes up a lot more time. And Brian and I recently discussed this, that you are talking to not just a prosecutor on a particular case, but I also have involved a caseworker, maybe from Murtis Taylor, Recovery Resources, one of the mental health agencies. I also have probably a APA officer. I have a number of people involved, social workers from our office, probation officers. There is an entire team approach, I think, to both dockets that would help people's success rate, I think, improve. So the amount of emails and text messages and phone calls I get throughout the day is exponentially larger than it used to be when I had a regular docket. I think the mental health is good to have dedicated people on those dockets, because I get to know like the people that I need to call given a particular situation. And I don't know if you guys experience this, but there are a lot of very unique circumstances. There's a broad range of mental health problems, symptoms, and you need to find unique solutions to these individuals to help them. And so it does, I rely totally, as the judge said, on the team of people to give me information. I'm just a lawyer. I walk in and I see people in a contact visit in the jail looking over my shoulder and laughing. They're saying something, they're talking to somebody, they are not with me and communicating with me on a regular basis. I will refer them for competency. I can't tell what's wrong with them, but I can at least know that they are not here present discussing the facts of their case with me. So that's the first step that I would take, is to get the psychiatrist with our court psychiatric clinic involved. That takes 6 weeks. 6 weeks before someone can send me a report saying that they had a 45-minute to an hour and a half interview with my client and send a report back to say whether they are competent or not. That person sits in jail, hopefully medicated now, for quite a long time. That was a real struggle trying to get medication to clients while they were incarcerated. So for 6 weeks, they sit in county jail, not the most therapeutic environment for anyone. And then finally, I can work on their case once I get a result saying that they're competent. So when we talk about needs looking forward, we need a different facility altogether to hold people where they probably are not safe in the community, to be honest. They need to be someplace that's safe for them, but also provide safety for the community, but not the county jail. So while we're waiting for results to come back, while we're waiting for medications to be administered and stabilized, while we're waiting for MAT to be provided, there should be a completely different looking facility where people can stay. I felt that the court psychiatric clinic does their job very well. There's just not enough of them to get a fast enough turnaround, same as Brian mentioned with the assessments for addiction. I am not a social worker. I'm not an addiction specialist. I certainly can't look at someone and tell what they need. But yeah, you come in here because you were found passed out from heroin, you need inpatient treatment. I'm not even thinking about asking a judge for outpatient, I don't care what that assessment comes back saying. You need to be someplace residential. The assessments, by the way, are also self-report. So, by the way, my clients are not particularly good historians or very honest about the extent of their problems. So, I'm not sure the value of those assessments at this point. I used to be all for them. Now I'm just like, we need to get this person out of jail and into a treatment facility. We definitely need a different detox facility. I shared with Brian on Friday that I lost a client who I've known for years. He hangs out in front of the Justice Center on a regular basis, panhandling, and I got to know him before I even represented him, actually, because I yelled at him, "Why are you panhandling out here? These people are the least able to help you, those walking in and out of the Justice Center. They're also the most likely to pull $1 out of their pocket and give it to him for his drug habit." But I did get to know him. I took him to breakfast one morning. I over the years, been in contact with his probation officer, and she's the one who called me Friday at lunch and told me he'd overdosed. She also shared with me that 2 weeks ago, he tried to get into a detox facility and they did not have a bed available. Why is that? I understand there are budgets to be worried about, but if someone comes into a detox facility, what person has the job who sends them away and tells them, not today? Maybe you'll feel like getting sober tomorrow or next week, or maybe you'll be dead. I don't get that. Funds need to be allocated differently. There is no medication in the county jail. I think it's actually a liability for the jail. I think the county is dangerously allowing people to detox in county jail without medical treatment. So we need more money. With the mental health, I do see that Metro is doing a great job early on assessing people and assessing and accessing their records, their diagnoses, and finding out what kind of medications that they were taking in the community. Oftentimes, my clients are not coming into the county jail having been medicated anytime recently. So they come in and they actually need stabilization, which brings me to bail reform. So I hear a lot about that, and I get calls from the ACLU. I've told them exactly how I feel about bail reform. There's plenty of people who do not need to sit in there on, some kind of theft charge, passing bad checks, stealing a credit card. Get them out. The people who do need to sit for a little while are the ones who have the addictions. Even though I just said they need to go someplace else, they don't need to go home. They don't need to go back into the community where they just were using. So I have asked parents who called, why can't my kid get a lower bail? I think the bail should be higher. Please do not post that bond. Give us a chance to get a bed available in a treatment facility. They're not using in county, at least that was true up until more recently. We've had more recent problems, but by and large, it is not so available in the county jail. It's available in prison, but you're not as likely to get a hold of drugs in county. But I beg people, do not bond your child out. And I'll tell them about phone calls I've gotten from parents saying, "I'm sorry, my son, it's been sons so far, won't be in court next week." And I don't want that call from you. Same with the mental health. If you are not stabilized, not only are you likely to pick up a new case if you are bonded out by a friend or a relative, but you are also vulnerable. You are not in a good place to be roaming the streets, oftentimes homeless, when you're not on your meds and you're not making good decisions for yourself and your own safety. So for those reasons, I think that bond reform doesn't account for all the particular reasons that people end up in jail and the reasons for holding people in a space that at least we know where they are, they're getting food, they're getting their medications, and they're somewhat safer, believe it or not, in county jail for that amount of time. So, what else? I think the only other piece that I offered to Cheryl that I think should be added for the next 5 years is we should try to figure out how to bring all these various agencies together. It's a patchwork of different community mental health agencies. They're not coordinated. I cannot keep up with all their funding requirements. Some of them can do an assessment in jail. Some of them I have to get the person out first, which a lot of judges won't go for. It's complicated, and I really wish that there was one kind of uniform set of access to mental health services in our county. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, I'm Justin Herdman. I'm the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio. We are the federal prosecution agency in the 40 northernmost counties of the state. So everything east to west, north of Columbus. So I'm a prosecutor. I'm not a healthcare policy expert. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a mental health professional. We have about 90 attorneys in our office. They're pretty hard-nosed. We don't have a lot of yoga in our office. We could work on that. I'll think about that one. What we do every day is we go out there and we put people in jail and we make them pay money. That is what we do best. And so what am I doing here on a Sunday morning with two public defenders and a recovery court judge then? Right? It's a great question. I'm here primarily because Cheryl asked me to do it. And I'd pretty much do anything she asked me to do. But the reality is, the thing that I spend the most time doing and figuring out strategies around is reducing the number of people who are dying as a result of overdoses. It's the number one threat to public safety in our district by far. And the simple fact is we are not going to solve this problem by putting people in prison and making them pay money. That's not going to get us where we need to go. An acknowledgement of that fact is that we have a heroin and opioid task force, which Cheryl mentioned at the beginning, which is comprehensive and collaborative. So we have people from the treatment and recovery space who are representatives there. We just had a meeting on Friday, actually. We have people from law enforcement, obviously, but we also have people from almost all of our major hospital systems. We have people from the survivor community and people who are in recovery who are members of the task force. We have people who are experts on reentry and recovery for those who are incarcerated and entering back into the population. We have people who have needle exchange programs and other types of services that you wouldn't typically think a federal prosecutor would have a positive opinion of. But the fact is that over time, I have certainly begun to appreciate that anytime we get an opportunity to get in front of somebody who's suffering from addiction, I don't really care what that vector is. I may not be able to pay for it on the federal level, but I think that it's worth a conversation about how we can get in front of that person and give them one more day where we get a shot at getting them into recovery long term. So DOJ is also a grant-making authority, and I'm the local representative, essentially the head of the agency for DOJ. And DOJ across the country spent hundreds of millions of dollars on programs just like recovery courts and drug courts. It's an acknowledgement of what we see on the national level, that these programs work, that there's data behind the success of those programs, and DOJ stands firmly behind them and will continue to do that. On our heroin and opioid task force, we have really divided our workload in 4 separate areas. I think I'll just mention them briefly because it gives you an idea of the breadth of what we're trying to cover out of our task force. We have an outreach and education committee. That is one of the most active parts of our task force. Historically, it's been responsible for a number of presentations to school groups, really just going to speak to anybody at any time on the dangers inherent in drug use, and in particular with opioids. One of the things that we've done recently, though, is we're trying to be as flexible as we can in responding to the threat, and I'll talk about that in just another minute here. But what we've done is, you may have seen some billboards around town that have pretzels and donuts on them. I actually paid for those out of our budget, our office budget. The United States Attorney's Office paid for those billboards, and we did that because we saw within the past year, we've seen a really concerning increase in the number of deaths associated with cocaine and fentanyl mixes. We've also seen an increase in straight cocaine deaths as well, But cocaine fentanyl mixes are particularly persistent, and they are a real threat because we have an entirely different demographic that's dying as a result of this conduct. And it's typically more African American. It's typically more. We have older folks who are dying. So every morning, every day actually, I get alerts on an overdose death and who responds to the scene. I got one this morning, and whereas I used to see those were 28-year-old white female in some suburban area, now the typical profile is a 56-year-old black male in Cleveland, has not been seen in several days. Somebody made an entry into the home to check on welfare, and the person's found dead with a crack pipe in their hand. So it's an entirely different demographic that's under threat, and we want to be as out in front of those people to make them aware of what that threat is. If they're ingesting crack cocaine for 2 decades, and they're used to a particular pattern of use and ingestion. If you introduce fentanyl in that mix on a person who's already up in age and may have other health problems, that person is far more likely to die than they would be if they were continuing in their typical habit, which again, I'm not going to encourage that type of use, but the fact is people are using, and I want to make sure they stay alive. And so that's why we're doing what we're doing on the Outreach and Education Subcommittee. We also have been aware of the need for fentanyl strips and making sure that those are being presented and available to people who are cocaine users, habitual cocaine users. So we've had a lot of success. We talked about this on Friday. Had a lot of success in distributing these out of barbershops in Cleveland. In fact, the barbershops have been the most prolific distributors of fentanyl strips, refilling like 2 or 3 times, asking for more fentanyl strips because their clientele are so anxious to get a hold of them and to use them, which is encouraging. We also have a healthcare policy subcommittee, which is one of the primary things that they've been successful doing is Project Dawn and the distribution of naloxone kits. That has saved more lives than we can count, but it's clearly the reason that we have more people, alive today, as opposed to a number of overdose deaths, which would be truly astonishing. It's already really bad, but it would be much worse without that. On law enforcement, I just want to emphasize this point. We coordinate on the interdiction of large-scale suppliers on the federal level. So we don't really interact with people who are arrested with use amounts of substances. We don't really have a place for alternatives to incarceration for those folks because the people that we typically prosecute for drug offenses are profiting in a massive amount. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, connections to large sources of supply, typically with Mexican cartels. So we don't do what they do on the municipal court or the common pleas court level because we don't have the same type of defendant who presents in our cases. I just wanted to emphasize that. And we have a data and analytics subcommittee, and I see that as one of the areas where coordinating on data is probably the #1 thing that we could accomplish over the next year. I think to Patti's point, making sure that we're all aligned. We all have different buckets of data and different streams of information, making sure that we have appropriate MOUs to protect privacy, healthcare information. It's really important so that we can react nimbly to emerging threats. I'll just take a couple minutes and say this. 5 years ago, I looked at the numbers, and they're all present in your books, too. I was happy to see that the Ohio Department of Health report has been provided to you and the recent Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's report from November. It's very good data. It's unfortunately all based on deaths, so it's very grim. But I would point out, 5 years ago, fentanyl was associated with 37 overdose deaths in Cuyahoga County. Since 2014, fentanyl has killed 1,409 people. And that's not counting this year, which is projected for 420. So we're talking almost 2,000 people who have died in 5 years as a result of fentanyl, which 5 years ago, basically no one was talking about because it had killed less than 40 people in the county. And just like that, overnight, you see what it does. Carfentanyl presents a similar, although I would say outsized threat, because if you look at the numbers for Cuyahoga County, 2014, 2015, nobody died from a carfentanyl-associated overdose. And then in 2016, we had 56 deaths. In 2017, the peak so far, 191 deaths associated with carfentanyl. And that dropped all the way down to 24 in 2018. But guess what? 2019, it's back up again to that 2017 level. And those carfentanyl deaths alone will make up for the relative amount of progress that we saw in terms of a decrease in overdose deaths in 2018. And that happened essentially overnight. We had a rash of these overdoses in January. It was persistent and continued throughout the late summer and early fall. And unfortunately, it is going to result in a number that is up close to where our 2017 levels of overdose deaths in Cuyahoga County were. And that's solely because of carfentanil. You could also look at it another way too, which is cocaine. If you look at those deaths associated with cocaine, is a real problem for us. It continues to be a persistent killer. In 2015, there were 115 cocaine-associated overdose deaths in Cuyahoga County. Then that more than doubled the next year to over 260, and has stayed at that persistently high level since then. We've seen more people using cocaine. We've seen more people dying from cocaine alone, but also dying from cocaine and fentanyl. So I talk about this all the time because I think it's important to keep reminding people that this threat changes all the time. We can't just talk about opioids. We have to talk about overdose deaths in general. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. And I'm afraid that this is part of what we'll see on the national level too, an increase in cocaine overdose deaths. So I'll just kind of cut to the chase here because we're running short on time. Ultimately, I see our interdiction efforts on supply. What they do is they give space to people who are really the people who are going to help solve this problem. They give space to first responders. They give space to people who are providing treatment and recovery services. They give an opportunity for somebody. If their dealer gets cut off, maybe it's a chance for them to engage with treatment and recovery professionals. And we acknowledge they're going to have to do. They might have to do that again and again and again and again. But the more that we can take off large-scale dealers, it gives us a little bit of time, not a lot of time, but it gives us a little bit of time, and we have to go on to the next case. And we are not going to solve this problem in law enforcement by ourselves. Who's going to solve this problem? People like who are at the table with me. Judge Synenberg, I would say, 20 years ago when I started off in the district attorney's office, we didn't have any kind of drug court in Manhattan. We had people who were arrested with use amounts of heroin and were referred to commonly by police officers, prosecutors, judges, bailiffs as junkies. That's how they were talked about. I never hear that anymore because nobody thinks about it that way. This is a very personal problem for all of us, even in law enforcement. We've lost friends. We've lost relatives. We know what this means. It's not confined to any sort of group at all. It affects all of us. And the prevention and treatment professionals are the ones who are going to be the heroes of this crisis, who are going to get us out of it. There are plenty of heroes in law enforcement. They do that every day. But when we talk about solving this crisis and getting us out of the crisis that we're in, it is going to be people who are in treatment, recovery, and prevention. Those are going to be the heroes of this crisis, who we're going to see our way through, people like Cheryl. And so I'm happy to be here, and I'll be happy to answer questions for a minute.
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. As you know, I have like 5 minutes, trying to keep us on schedule, give you a chance to eat lunch before our performance starts. So bear with me, and I'm sure the panelists will stay for a few minutes outside if somebody wants to ask them questions out there. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of your help.
Hi, my name's Roberta, and I know that none of you are drug dealers, but I'm really confused by a business model that, if I want to make money and I'm a drug dealer, addiction's great because I have a constant source, then why do I want to introduce fentanyl to kill my clients? I just don't get that.
It's about profit. If you buy, however much you pay for a kilo of fentanyl, say it's $10,000, although I think that's probably high, the dealers will cut it in a way that they can make over $1 million on the street selling that product. So it's about profit.
But their constituents die. I mean, they're not going to continue to.
Drug dealers, I don't think, have ever really taken the welfare of their customers into account. And the reality is that they kind of build that into their profit-making model. But it's all about profit. That's why they're doing it.
It's all about profit, and I want to say one other thing. It's also about trying to make your constituency happy. So if the fentanyl is going to produce a better high, until they die, it's going to keep them coming back. And from what I've heard from recovering addicts who have gotten into recovery, luckily, also if they hear of someone, if you're with, you know a lot of other people that are addicted, and you have a friend that died, you are running to that supplier to get drugs from that supplier because that must have been really good stuff. And I'm going to just do a little less than he did. and that's how I'm going to get high. So there are many reasons why they do what they do, and
Yeah.
a lot of it is profit, but a lot of it has to do with the mind of an addict.
If I just may, I want to concur with what Cheryl's saying. We're not dealing with people who are making rational
No,
decisions.
they're not
The dealer
rational.
who sells to people who die becomes hot, and that's the part of the disease of the brain of addiction. And yes, it makes no sense. Why not cut it with something that's not so deadly? And by the way, how depraved is it to cut it with something that you know will kill people? So it's not just people that are selling drugs do not care about to whom they sell.
Correct.
But you're right, Cheryl.
And also, I would like to add on to that is that the dealers themselves are addicted.
Many times.
Some, yeah,
Many cases.
yeah, support their own habit.
I know addicted to what they're doing.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It's a lifestyle thing too. It's not just the disease of addiction, but it's also changing lifestyle. That's a tough one. Behavior.
Thank you for a very nice discussion. My name is Dr. Margolin. I'm pain management physician. We have two offices, one in the northern part and one in the southern. So I'm kind of a little bit feedback from the trenches. And HSS came out with 5-point strategy in 2017. One of the points is advancement and support of pain management program. We were very happy. So far, unfortunately, we have not seen that happening in the area. There are certain things that really concern us. We're short in time, but very, very specific. We use ORs extensively. We see people who doctor shop. My agreement says it's a felony. We have people who are getting up to 2,000 pills, obviously not for self-use. Despite police report, we don't see anything being done or enforced. Getting somebody pink slip, almost impossible. And threats of violence or actual violence. I'm not sure if you will stay for my presentation. I'll give facts that treat it very anemically. Police come and says, oh, we're so sorry. If the guy who pushes to your nose or hit your nose comes back, we'll be back and we'll transpass him. That's what's being done, and I don't think it's what we want to see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My name is Mary. I'm an addiction professional, treatment professional. And what I'd like to point out is that the only way this thing is going to be resolved at all is if we remember we need a full continuum. We need the community and all of us working. And we need to remember that, you know, we can't justify or delineate one MAT medicine better than another or one treatment approach better than another, because we need it all. We need prevention, we need treatment, we need aftercare, we need family education, we need it all. And even then, we'll be chasing behind it. And so I think if we're going to really reduce stigma, we really have to recognize that we need to change our belief and attitudes about addiction, which is slowly happening. But we also need to remember that all of it together is what will make a difference.
Yeah,
all of
right.
it.
Totally agree.
Right on. Yeah.
Once again, that old saying of it takes a village. It truly does.
Yeah, you're right. 100% right.
Thank you. My name is Laurel Barr, and I am a parent, as another parent here, of a heroin addict who has been incarcerated 7 times now in county jail. And he has received some treatment from his sentencing, probation, and in certain programs. I was very encouraged to hear, I spoke to the Adams Board a couple months ago, about a possibility of having lockdown treatment. Because each time he's received 30 days or 60 days, it's an open door. And he can walk out, which he does, and he becomes a probation violator, which sends him back to jail, which he cannot have any kind of bond, which is good. And yet he just continues to stay in the system and continues to have felonies that follow him. So even if he were to recover, which he can't seem to do, he can't get work, he can't get housing, he can't get a credit card, he can't buy a car. He is stuck in a very bad dead-end system, and you know, he's somebody's son. We love him. He's not a junkie. But thank you for that. I really appreciate that idea of locking them in. I'm sorry to say, but not in jail.
The whole
Right.
concept of having
Thank you, Laura.
having employment and having housing is so critical, because even if you take care of a mental health issue and a drug addiction, not that it's ever fully taken care of, but you've got that kind of under your belt, and then you get out and there's no place to stay, because every place that you stayed before is a trigger or has people there that are using, and housing is really non-existent.
Right, but we all support a diversion center so people can go upon arrest, not to jail, but to a place. Let's take bricks and mortar and hopefully not, it seems like a lot of treatment centers are in places where people used to buy their drugs. They're not in the best neighborhoods. But on the treatment continuum, we believe that employment and education is more toward the end because the miracles come with recovery, but someone has got to be in it for a sustained period of time with sober living. And that's after you get out. But the county supports this. I mean, I was at that press conference when they talked about this. They support this. There's money coming in, and it is getting better. To your point, it's 30 years ago, it was lock them up and throw away the key. Today, we are here in a crowded room because people care about each other and that this is a disease. We recognize it. We care about your son, okay? And changes are happening because we see what's happening here. But we support what you are talking about. Thank you.
All right, with that, I'm afraid. Okay, one last question. I know. Joan, you're causing me trouble.
Oh, there's two questions. Sorry, Cheryl.
We can get them in the hallway, too.
I'm a substance use professional, 48 years in the field, and one of my frustrations in sitting here is I've heard this panel dialogue for the last several years. And my analogy is this. We as a society, it's as if we're perched on a bridge. And everything we do in our daily highways and byways, we're confronted with holes in the bridge, which are intentionally there. They're sponsored to be there. We're invited to visit. People are falling through. And the logic has been to put lifeguards along the raging river below. And give them extended poles and give them lights and whatever. And anybody with any rational thinking would understand that we need to patch the damn holes in the bridge. We live in a society that is culturally married to drug use. And until we begin to talk about that, we live in a society where ignorance is a foundation. We live in a society where agencies that are very well intended and programs at work are positioned to fight with each other for the limited funding. It's not an issue we don't have the money, it's where the money is going. We have no problems building prisons, we have no problems talking about walls, but as soon as you put up a 2,000-mile wall between Mexico and the United States, suggesting that the drug cartel in Mexico is the problem with meth use in the United States, you've missed the point. It's a law of supply and demand. A 30-foot fence will only cause the drug cartel to buy a 35-foot ladder. I mean, and everybody understands that. So I wish we would stop talking and collectively, well-intended people, and focus on let's patch the holes in the bridge. We need the lifeguards, though. But again, the frustration is I keep seeing the same thing. The other one last point I'll make, alternative programs, treatment. The family is a primary and key role in this. And sometimes the family itself can be the most toxic part of recovery. Because if you don't address that dysfunctional misunderstanding, the enabling, that whole misinterpretation, and that individual goes back in the family, it's a setup for relapse. I hope that this, again, is more than just another meeting and people will take this and grow from this. But I would tell you, we don't need another task force. We don't need another panel. We need to take the information that is there and start patching holes in the bridge. My opinion. Thank you.
With that, I want to thank our panelists, and I want to say to all of you, I believe that you are trying to patch those holes. I've been doing this now for 5 years since I lost my daughter, and the most reward that I have received, as much as you talk about seeing the holes, which I have seen, it has changed. I can tell you that when my daughter was using and I was not aware of it, the police she actually fell into the Lyndhurst police. She wasn't arrested, but she was on their radar because of who she was hanging out with. They saw where she bought from. They then put her into the FBI's radar. And that task force that was here in Cleveland and probably still is, the FBI task force that was strictly working on drug use, and followed her for a year. Never, ever trying to arrest her, because she wasn't buying enough to be a problem to anybody. And never, even though they were seeing that she lived at home and actually was using at home and actually overdosed in my house when I wasn't home, no one ever notified me that an overdose happened in my home. I can tell you today from the police that I have personally spoke to and helped to train in some cases would not do that same thing today. So things are slowly changing. My daughter, I can tell you, there's no doubt that she was one that fell through the cracks. And it's unfortunate, but it's why I got involved. And one of the best things that I have seen is sitting on these task force and meeting these individuals, whether they're doctors, social workers, other people that are speaking out. No one's getting paid for this. No one is getting paid additional fees to do this, but they are very much trying, not succeeding, but trying to patch the holes. Thank you.